What's going on, everybody? James here from Artofficial Entertainment, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to be able to get climbing set up and the different parts of setting up climbing. So let's go ahead and dive in. Alright, so we are back here in the project that we've been using for the series so far. And like I said, we're going to be taking a look at climbing and state setup realistically. Now, the system really offers a total of 5 main types of states where we have point climbing, ledge climbing, free climbing, beams, and wall run. So those are the 5 main types of states right now. Now I'm going to be adding more in the future, but right now those are the main states that are available. And the way that you can use these is point climbing is, well, point, ledge, and free climbing, I guess, all more or less relate to a specific type of climbing. So if we were to use ledge climbing, for example, we would use it on something. I'll make a few example actors here. So if I go ahead and I just kick a cube in here, and we'll just shrink it in a little bit. Something like this, right? Something where you're just going to kind of go on top of the object. This would be something you would use for like point climbing, right? Because you can't really go left and right on it, but you can go onto it and maybe jump or transition to another target point. Now, whereas ledge climbing, you would have something more like this, where you can go along the surface of the area, but only in left and right. Now, for free climbing, it allows you to be able to go across both up and down and left and right in areas like this. So this is kind of the difference between the 3 main types of climbing. Now, beams are something you can use to be able to either walk across areas like gaps like this, or you can also hang off of them as well. Now, one thing to note is that ledge climbing also offers a hang option as well. So it's something that you can set up inside of the system, and we'll cover that as we get deeper into the video. But I just want to advise that right now only beams and ledge climbing have the hang option, but I'm going to be including it into other all the action types in a future update. But the way that the hang is going to work for the ledges is going to be essentially in areas like this, where it's a little bit, a little more kind of shorter, I guess, in height. Something like this we would hang, whereas something like this we would do a full plant where our feet are actually kind of placed up against the area. Now, these 2 options can be defined inside of the settings for what that value is. So whether or not this creates a full contact, or this does, or this does. So you can set the values inside of the settings, which we're going to get to in a moment. But I just want to note that you can set up hanging to be just, a change between the height of the object just by, having a difference between this or this. Now, as far as how to be able to assign states to a specific actor, it can actually be done very easily through tags. So if we click on, for example, this actor here, and if we go into the search bar here in the details and type in tag, you're going to see actor and then tags with the ability to add elements. Now, you can use this on more than one as well. So if we take all 3 of these actors, we can then add tags to all 3 of them instead of just one. Now, one thing to bear in mind though is that if you have one selected that has a tag and the others do not, you're going to receive this, which is the multiple values. When the values are not the same, it's not going to allow you to, change them all at once. But if they are, then you can just highlight them and add the tags. Now, the tags are as follows. For point climbing, you're going to use point. For ledge climbing, you're going to use ledge. For beams, it's beam. And for wall run, it's wall running. Now, the way that you would do this, though, is that it's actually a 2-tag system. So I'm just telling you the tags, but I'm going to, we're going to do an actual setup here. So the first tag is going to be climb. So that's going to be the first tag for anything if you're using point climbing, ledge climbing, free climbing, as well as beams. Wall running does not need to have the climb tag. Beams, I only had to add it in because of the fact that certain functions I routed in through the jump and transition for climbing systems. So because it was easier just to route that in, you do need to make sure to have a climb for beams as well. But from here, once we have the climb tag, we can then define the type of climbing movement that we want to have. So for example, I can set this to ledge, and now this is a ledge type actor. Or I can set this to point, and it'll be a point type actor. I can set this to free, I can set this to beam. So it's really up to you how you want to set it up, but just bear in mind that whatever you set the second tag is going to set the climb behavior it's going to try to perform on that actor. So what we're going to do is we're just going to delete these 3 out. We're going to keep this one here in the middle, and we're going to put 2 tags on it. First one being climb, and the second one being ledge. Now, if you guys ever forget which tags are applied for the climbing, it's all going to be in the documentation, so you can always just grab a quick screenshot from that as well. Now that we understand how the tag system works and how the various parts of just getting things in the world to be recognized as climb actors, let's go into our character, and we're going to start adding in some crucial pieces to make climbing fully functional. So if we open up our third person Blueprints BP third person character, at least for me, and we're going to go over to our movement input. Now we can take the jump input here, and we're just going to move it off to the side, and we'll expand our space here. Now, one thing to note is that this here right now is for the first, and I believe the third person, and I believe the first person perspective as well. It's going to be using the same control rotation. Now, if you're using a top down or a click based movement or something like that, this is going to be different. So if you are not using the first person or third person perspective and using some other sort of control direction for the world direction on the input, what I recommend is highlighting both of them and then Control D to duplicate, because this way you can save these for the next step. But if you're using the first person or third person perspectives, you do not need to do this step. But from here, all we need to do is right click, and we're going to type in Parkour input, and you'll see Parkour input override, and then in parentheses, dynamic Parkour trace system. Now, this is just going to give you the dynamic Parkour trace system reference, as well as this Parkour input override function. The reason why we save these if you're using something other than the first person or third person is because if we double click on the input override here, it'll actually bring us into the function itself. And then if we look off of the select nodes here, so this one is for left and right, and this one is for forward and back. And then we have a select node here with none. Now you can see here that none is actually using the same setup as I had shown that I just deleted inside of the character. So whatever you're going to be using, you're going to want to replace none with this part right here. Leave the rest, but just replace off of none. But again, you only need to do this if you are not using the standard third or first person perspective control scheme. Go ahead and delete that out. And then we're also going to just keep in mind that X is left and right and Y is forward and back, because then we can delete all of this out just like so. And then we'll take the override here, plug it in off of triggered, and then we'll take X into the right, Y into the forward, and we'll highlight both of these and then highlight our function and press Q, because this will give us that nice little kind of tidy, straightened connection. Now, we also need our Parkour system here. We're going to pull off and type in active Parkour state, and we're going to get the active Parkour state, and we're going to see if enum equal. Now, we'll leave it at none and get a branch with B and left click, and then hook up the Boolean value. So if our active Parkour state is equal to none, we don't want to do anything. However, if this is false, we're going to grab another Parkour reference here, pull off, and then just type in Parkour update, and you'll see update Parkour state data. So I'll plug that in off of false. Now you also notice that we have a right and forward input, so we're going to plug these in just so that way it's being passed through and the values are being fed into this function. And we also want to make sure that off of completed, we plug into the input override as well, because this will make sure that when the values gets reset back to 0, if we are in a climbing state, it also makes sure to reset them in this function. So we'll compile and save, and that's the main thing for the movement overrides. The next thing we need to do is just quickly add in a reset, because when we enter into any state, whether it be beams or wall running or climbing of any type, what's going to happen is that it's going to override the gravity. For beam walking, it's going to override the movement walking speed and braking deceleration walking, as well as for point climbing or any other type, it's going to modify fly speed and fly braking deceleration. Now also, all rotations get overridden when you're entering into any state. So what this basically means is that we need to kind of reset these values to what you want in your project. So if we open up the interfaces section of the character, you're going to see this state reset execution option. So we're going to double click on this and we'll pull it up a little closer to kind of the rest of our main stuff here. And then we're going to first grab our character movement and we're going to reset our rotation. So for me, I'm using the orient rotation to movement. So I'm going to get the set node for that. So this way I can set it back to true. So this from here, you just want to set it to whatever your rotation is going to be. But just bear in mind, all rotation values are overridden. So this means using controller yaw, pitch, and roll, as well as orient rotation to movement and use controller desired rotation. All of these are all completely overridden and set to false whenever a state of any kind is triggered. Now from here, we also want to make sure our max walk speed. Go ahead and set max walk speed. Now we'll also just start grabbing some values here. So we'll go in walk braking deceleration. Set that as well, and then we're going to go with fly speed and braking deceleration, and we'll get the braking deceleration flying. So now with that, we just need to grab our gravity, set gravity scale, and there we go. Okay, so now we have all the main pieces that we need. So one thing to note is that if you're not using flying in your game, you really don't need to worry about the fly speed or braking deceleration flying, but if you are using them, you're going to want to make sure that they are reset. So we're going to go ahead and set the max walk speed. My default is 600, so we're going to set it to that. And then my braking deceleration walking by default is going to be 1350. My braking deceleration flying is just going to be set back to 0. And then my max fly speed, I'm going to set to 600. So this is just basically setting everything back to whatever the project defaults are, which currently are just set up to the standard template values. Go ahead and plug all those in. So now we're resetting our movement mode, or our movement speeds, decelerations, and our rotation. So now we have all of our main things that the system is overriding. We are now resetting. Now, obviously, you can also make custom values. If you have, certain unique deceleration or walk speed functions, you can go ahead and hook these in off of this as well. You don't have to do the static set. This is just going to trigger whenever a state is ended. So this way you can use this to reset when you're back into a standard like walking, running type of movement mode. But now with that, we can compile and save, and all of the primary stuff in our character has been set up to be able to start working in some climbing stuff. So what we'll do is we'll go into our world here, and I'm going to hit play. I'm going to go ahead and actually move my player start here, move it over here. All right, so if I go over to this actor here, which we've set as climb and ledge, if I hit the spacebar here, you'll see that we get the height point right on the top of that climb area. So the system is automatically going to stop and try to find the top of the first found climb area. So in this instance, we've given it a ledge area defined. So we know that yellow, or the height, is going to be where we want to go. But we also saw that we have that initial target there and the kind of below it on that first hit we can use as well. So this is just, that standard looking at what targets we can use and how we want to use them. Because now from here, what we can actually do is go ahead and actually set up a simple climb start animation. So if I go to my climbing assets folder here, you can see we have this wall run animation here. Now, just as I keep saying, I'm always going to sound like a broken record, always make sure that your animations have root motion and root motion is enabled. At least for the ones that we're turning into action montages anyways. So what we're going to do is we'll right click, turn it into an anim montage, and we'll start taking a look at the animation itself. As you can see, he kind of just runs up the wall and then he plants with both feet and the hands on the area where he's climbing onto. He's not hanging off of it. It's what I would call a full contact. So what we're going to do is first we're going to add notify tracks here. So we'll add a couple notify tracks and then right click, add notify state, and then the motion warp with offset. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to actually use the initial point first. So when he gets to this wall, you can see he kind of plants on it and then he moves upwards, right? Well, what we can do is use that initial point first and then go add notify state, motion warp with offset, and then we can go ahead and have him go to the height point from here. Now, a quick tip when you're using the warps to be able to get to certain climb targets is, if you'll notice, his hands are still moving here. However, right about here, his hands lock in place. Although his feet are moving, his pelvis is moving, there's a lot of other motion happening, but his hands have stopped moving. So we can actually look at that as the end of the root motion. So we can actually make our window end right there, and that's where we know we're going to kind of be where we need to be. Now from here, we're just going to right click, add notify, and we're going to do the reset parkour action here. We're not going to be finding any land targets or anything like that because this is a climb start action, right? We're going to be attaching to something. So we'll just set the blend time to 0.2 for right now, but we're going to come back to this in a moment. For the offsets here, we're going to go into the first one here, root motion modifier, and we'll set this to initial. So that's that red point that we saw. Now we're also going to make sure to uncheck ignore z-axis and warp rotation. We're going to leave checked. So warp rotation stays checked. Now you don't have to do this for this one, but you want to make sure at the minimum to do this for the second offset, the one that's actually bringing us to that height point. But for this one, I'm going to leave a warp rotation checked here for this one. And then for the offset here, we're going to bring it forward. We'll go negative 80, just to kind of bring it back away from the wall a little bit. Now for this next one here, what we're going to do is set the target name to height, and then ignore z-axis and warp rotation uncheck. Ignore z-axis uncheck, make sure warp rotation is checked. So the way that it works is that the warp rotation is going to, when it's checked, it's going to actually try to use some sort of rotation to adjust. Now, when you're doing vaulting or drop actions, you really don't need to modify the rotation because it's going to use the direction that it starts in. But for climbing actions, if the actor isn't perfectly aligned, you want to make them aligned to the area where they're going to be attaching. And this is where warp rotation being checked comes into play, because with that checked, if we go up into the primary offsets here under orientation use, we can actually change this from actor to primary target normal. Now this is going to be something you're going to want to do for the majority of all climb actions. Now, there are some instances where you're going to be using the length normal for certain action types, but the majority of all actions when you're setting up climbing is going to be using the primary target height. Now, the height is going to also be from that point that we saw. So if I go to here, that is that yellow point is going to be that normal. And you know what? Actually, if we go back to our character really quick, click on the parkour system, and we go to under the secondary settings, debug settings, we can open up under found target options, and we can check that little show normals option here. Because now if we hit play, you can see the yellow marker there. So that's indicating that's that yellow height target for the normal. So that allows us to now see, okay, so that's the direction for that. So, okay. So we're going to use that target normal. And now this part's going to really change based off the animations you're using. Now, I just know this because I've worked with these animations quite a bit. So I know that the forward offset I want to make is -46. And the up offset is going to be -125. Now, this is going to change based off of your animation. So it's something you're going to need to play around with a little bit using the same tricks that I've shown you in the other videos. But we're just going to set it up on this one action for right now. But with that in mind, now what we can do is go over to where we have our reset parkour action. Because there's one additional step we need to do here, and this is something else we need to do with every climb action that we're going to be setting up, or state type action. So this is wall running, beams, climbing of any type. We want to make sure that we do this part, where we go into the details panel, and then under the state control options, drop this down, and we make sure that activate state is checked. So whatever the found state is, which the search is going to be based off of this tag system here that we've been kind of reviewing. So this one's set to ledge. So if when we come over here and we search, the found type is going to be that of a ledge climb. Now, also make sure the enable auto blend out is unchecked over here, and then we're good to go. So now we can go ahead and hit save, minimize, and now we're going to go ahead and start getting this set up into our animation selector. But I'm going to be covering the animation selector a little bit too, so we're not going to be getting right into the action setup because some of the stuff's a little different when we get into some of the climbing stuff. So we're going to go ahead into our content folder here, go to the DPTS assets, selection tables, and we're going to go to the from climb section here, and we're going to see that we have a climb start selection table. So we're going to double click to open that up. Now from here, we're going to go ahead and add a new row. Inside of the row here, we're going to add the element that we're going to use. So because we only have one climb start, we're just going to make the single element. Now, as you can see here, this looks very familiar from the other action types that we've set up so far. We have action name, compare values, and the montage selection. So now for the compare values, we can go ahead and put these in really quickly. I'm just going to use one single value, and it's going to be the height. And I'm going to set this to between 50 and 350. But the main thing when you're dealing with anything that's a climbing or transition type state, we're going to take a look under the action modifications here. Now you'll see that we have a primary modification and secondary modification similar to the vaulting actions. But if you look at the listing here, it's a little bit different. We only have sprint, sidewall left, right, and then from drop off, meaning that we're trying to start a climb from on top of somewhere. So like if we were to try to climb on this area. So with these modifications though, we can set up a lot of different type of climb starts. But the main thing that also helps control things as well is the state match restrictions. So you can see here we have a target option. If we hit the little plus symbol here, you'll see that the index pops up and we have a primary type and subtype. So if we look, we have the ledge, point, free, balance beam, and wall run. And then under the subtype, we have full contact, hang, and none. Now, as I explained earlier, for something like a ledge, a full contact versus a hang would be, the difference between these two type of actors. One where your hands are going to be able to fit on the space of the object, or this one where you're going to be able to do a full 4-point contact, where something like this, where you're going to end with your feet on the object as well. Now the subtypes for beam are the same. The only difference being is obviously hang is hang, but full contact is going to be referencing a beam walk. And this is just to maintain it so that way I didn't have to have a third value just for beam walking. So full contact means you're walking in beam mode, and then hang is obviously just hang. So we can use this to be able to set only specific type of found targets when they are found. So in this instance, right, we have a ledge climb set up here, and we have a ledge climb set up here, but this one's going to be full contact. This one's going to be hang. Okay, so in this instance, If we want to select this animation, we might want to not want to do that if it's hanging. So we're going to go with the ledge climb, full contact. But let's say you also wanted to use this for point climbing as well to get to a target. Well, all we need to do is add an element, and then under the index, we're going to go ahead and set this to point climb, full contact. And you can add as many of these as you want to be able to assign specific types of found targets when it comes to the tags for animation selection. Basically, it's just like a matching game, to put it simply. You know, whatever tag it's going to find when you're out in the world, it's going to try and make sure that that type is selected in the animation. If it's not, it's going to ignore it and try to find one that does match. So we'll take our montage here, and then we'll grab our wall. Here we go, the wall run montage here that we've got. So I think it's the right one. Yeah, perfect. So now with that set up here, we can go ahead and save, go back to our character. And we're going to go under the interfaces here, action events, and grab the climb start action. And we're going to just highlight the dynamic parkour trace system here, and then Control D to duplicate it, pull off anim selection, and you'll see anim selection, climb start. So just like with all the other ones, you know, we got that nice matching of each value. And then off the compare values here, we can just do a make array. And like I said, I'm just doing the height. So you can put as many values in here as you want, but again, I'm just going to go ahead and use height F as my one value. Now, when it comes to anything that's a state type, so this, you know, climbs, I do recommend setting the priority instead of compare value or modification to state type match. This is going to ensure that it looks at the state match first before anything else. So if we go ahead and compile and save, the last thing we need to do is just go into our parkour system here, go into the details, under the secondary settings, allowed actions, and make sure that climb start is set to true. So now if we go ahead and compile, save, minimize, hit play, and we go up to this object here, you can see that we are doing the climb start. But now there's one last thing I'm going to cover before we get into the actual setting stuff, and that's going to be another way that we can apply warp offsets. So we open up the wall run animation here for my climbing. If we open up the warp offsets here in the details panel, you're going to see this option that says use state warp overrides. Now what this does is allows you to actually set a listing of warp overrides to use in climbing. This way you don't have to do what we did here, where we had to list each of the offsets forward and up. And you got to think, right? You could have, you know, 5, 10, 15 different climbing animations. I think at one point I had, I think 12 different climb start animations, probably around 20 to 30 different climb jump animations, transitions. I had probably over 50 different actions the system was selecting at one point. Now, at this time, you would not want to have to set up the overrides for each one of these actions, right? Well, you don't really have to. You only have to define them once. And then if we go into the third-person character here, under the dynamic parkour trace system here, and then if we go under system and look under overrides, you're going to see that there's the state warp overrides right here. Now, by default, I do have some values put in here. And the way that it works is that you can assign a match type. So just like how we did with the climb start, how we said, okay, we want ledge climb, full contact, point climb, full contact to be able to be allowed for that action type, right? Well, for that particular action, I set the offsets to be -46 and -125 for forward and then up. Now, if we take a look at those offsets inside that are assigned to these specific types of climbing, you can see that -46 and -125 is right here. Now, there are also offsets for hanging and full, let's see, I think this is for, yeah, it's for wall run. So there's offsets for each one of these, and we can use these in a variety of ways, but realistically, the best thing to do is to first assign these values. What do you need them for your different climb start types? And then rather than going one by one in each one of the animations, right, we can go ahead and just zero these out actually completely. Because now that we know, okay, I need -46 and -125, they're assigned in my character. So let's go ahead and just check state warp overrides. Click on save. And if I now hit play and go up to the object here, you can see it does the exact same thing, goes to the exact same place. So now all I need to do to set my overrides in climbing is check a box. Now, there is another place where these are used, but we're going to get to that later in the video. But the main thing to know is that it can be used to be able to help offsets for climbing. And now you can also, just as a note, you can add additional offsets as well. Just because you use this does not mean you can't use this. You can add additional values to whatever the warps are from these settings. So you can kind of play around and mix and match a lot of different things really easily from just this simple menu here. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the settings for climbing and how we can adjust various things. So if we go into the content browser, DPTS assets, selection tables, and then under settings, open up the DPTS settings selection table. Now we have messed around a lot with the from ground state stuff, but we're going to close this and we're going to open up now from the from climb state. Now when you first open it, you'll see that there are two options, one with an array with 5 elements and then some subtype settings. So just really quickly for the subtype settings here, we have two different options here. We have a type match for ledge and a type match for beam. Ledge climb, you can see that the switch value is set for 80. This is where, as I had said earlier, the value can be adjusted in the settings. So like if it's greater than 80, it's going to go into a full contact, which means that this is greater than 80, so it's a full contact. This is not greater than 80, so therefore it's a hang. So this is where you can assign this value. Now, regards to how the balance beam one works, we'll come back to that because that one's a little bit more complicated, not by a whole lot. It's just that it changes based off of what type of climb you're in. So we'll kind of come back to that one. But we'll close the subsettings here. And like I said, we're going to come back to all that. We'll open up the primary settings now. Now, before you start getting overwhelmed, don't worry, there isn't this many settings. This is just allowing you to be able to set settings for different type of states. So if I open up, for example, index 0, you'll see that we have state match type under all the settings here. So we got active validations, jumps, secondary use, and speed. So if I open up the state match type though, index 1 and 0 is for ledge climb full contact and point climb full contact. So that's what we're working with right now. So these are going to be the settings we're going to mess with. All of these others are just tied to different types of climbing. So we got ledge climb hang there. Let's see, what's this one? This one is beam climb hang. So we have a bunch of different options that we can use to change how certain things are going to behave. And you really only need to work with one type at a time. So you don't need to work with like setting all of these up at once, only just work with one climbing type. And a lot of these are set up to be pretty good from the start. So you might not need to even really do a whole lot of adjustments. But we're going to look at first the active space validation settings. And this is under the index 0 here. So we're going to take a look at this. Now we're going to pull this off to the side. And then we're also going to want to go back to our character really quickly. And under the dynamic parkour trace system, secondary settings, open up the debug settings. And we're going to do two things. First thing is we're going to take the found target options and we're going to disable both of these. So we don't want to show the normals or the targets right now. And then we're going to open up the trace options and then switch it from the drop jump target search to climb validations instead, and then compile and save. Now from here we can hit play, and if we go on top of the object here, you can see we can move left and right, and we have some traces running. We got 2 line traces that go out in front of the character, one down, one forward, and this is getting the active target point for where we currently are. And then we have another trace that's a little bit of a bigger box trace going around the character's torso. This is making sure that the space that the character is moving in is going to be valid and is not something like a pipe or a pole or something blocking the way. Now, one thing to note is that if the actor that it collides with has a climb tag, this will not stop it. So just note that it's only going to do it for actors that are not set up to be able to be climbable or traversed of any kind. On top of those two, we also have 2 more traces. One that's a little box trace going above the character, and another one that's more of a kind of elongated box tracing the top edge of the object, but moving left and right with our character. And as you can see, this is actually the trace, the one that's more longer on the Z. This is the one that's actually stopping our character if it doesn't hit anything. So if it doesn't find our climb target, then it's actually going to stop completely. Now, there's a lot of different ways we can modify how this is going to work. So if we open up the settings here, and we take a look at first the validation offset. So this is the thing that's actually stopping me from getting past its edge point. If I set this from 40 to 80, for example, you can see that it's now stopping me much farther away from the edge because it's throwing that trace 80 units instead of just 40. Now you can see here we also have the validation search size. If I change this from 15 to 30, it's now going to make that Z a lot larger. Now, the reason why it's at a value higher than the rest is because I found that when you're going on something that's kind of angled, something that may not be flat like this, the system did have a hard time searching and being able to find it when you went downwards. So giving it a little bit of an extra value on the Z just allows the trace to ensure that it's going to find the target as you're moving along it. Now, the primary validation trace distance, this one is set to 60 by default, but you can set it to whatever you want. Usually a good rule of thumb is that whatever your distance is going to be that you're going to be sitting your character back, add an additional like 20 units, and there you go. So for instance, here I'm moving my character back 45 units for this particular climb style, so I'm taking the validation trace and moving it forward 60 units, just to make sure that it's always going to hit. And maybe just go a little bit past, but as you can see, not by a whole lot. Now, the character validation size here, we can play around with this, but you want to make sure that it does fit around your character within a reasonable measure. So something to keep in mind, so you don't want to make it too big or too small. You know, we set it to 20, you can see that it doesn't really find much except for around the crotch area. So we want to make sure that this is going to be set to a value that's actually going to make sense for our character's overall size. So I did find that 80 or 90 works if you're trying to go the full character. However, we can set this down to like 30 or 40 and it works just fine as well. Now, for the secondary validation, this is something that's not going to occur for every single climbing type. So something just to keep in mind. But you can see how we have that little box there. And that's going to look for if there's anything that's going to be blocking as we're moving left and right on the top of the area. And we can change the size of this as well as the offset of this by, just changing these values here. I can set this to 30 and then it'll start up a lot higher. I can set this from the search area to 20 on the Z and it will collide with the objects, obviously. But as I had said, these traces are designed to make it so that way if they find a climb area, it will not stop. So if it finds something that is not climb, it will stop. In that instance, as you saw, it did not. So just something to keep in mind when, as you're going through and setting things up, that things that have climb tags are going to allow everything to continue. And as I had said, all of these different climb types have their own set of settings. So you can, set these up to be whatever you want to make sure that they're going to match what you're trying to set up for to the different climb types, allowing you to set very much a unique setup of the climbing, regardless of the fact that it's a bot asset. So I'm trying to make sure that there's never going to be a case where you guys are going to have the same looking system as me or as anybody else. Now, outside of just the validation settings, you can see we also have speed settings here. So we're going to open this up and you'll see we can set max speed and braking deceleration. If I set this to 250 and go over to the object now and climb up it, you can see that we now move much faster. So we can set the speed. The braking deceleration also does help when you set the speed higher to make sure that he stops faster. So I might set this to 3500 so that way he fully stops when he gets no input. But realistically, like I keep saying, you can play around, have some fun, break some stuff, do what you feel like feels good for your project. Now, one last thing within the settings that I want to talk a little bit about is under the secondary use settings. So if we take a look at the last value here, don't worry too much about the corner target or the transition length. Look at the space validation width. So you can see right here, this one is set to 40 for anything that is a type of ledge or beam. Ledge or point. Now, if I were to make this much smaller, so something like this, right? So that's going to be smaller than the 40 units. It's not actually going to allow me to climb onto it. It won't even find it because it's finding it to be too small. But if I make this just a smidge bigger, it's going to put it within the value. I'll now be able to climb on top of it. So this value helps control whether or not an area will be selected under the space validation width. It's going to control whether or not the area is going to be validated based off of if it actually has enough space. So this is something really good to help it so that way if you come at it from like this angle, it won't actually allow you to climb onto like this corner that's up against the wall. But the other values here we're going to come back to when we talk about the transition action settings. Now from here, all you really need to do is just start assigning different settings and taking a look at how things are going to behave. And again, we just started with the singular climb type, but we're going to work in other climb types in the next video as well. Now that doesn't mean that this video is over. I just want to note that the some stuff we are going to be working on in the next one when we look at the transitions and jump actions. But speaking of next things on our list here, we should really start getting some animations in place because when we go ahead and go along the object here, we're still using our standard walk and movement, idle animation. So we're going to want to change that over to some actual climbing animations. So let's go ahead and take a look at some simple ABP setup. Now I already have some ABP stuff together, but I'm going to show you guys that really quickly. So if I go into my climbing folder here, and we go over to any one of these folders, beam, walk, hang, whatever. So if I open this up, you're going to see that I have a blend space 1D as well as some animations. We get a forward, back, and idle. So now with these animations, you can actually make a 1D blend space by right-clicking, going to animation, legacy, and you'll see blend space 1D. Now in any situation where you're going to actually just be going, in one direction. So for example, on a ledge, you're just going to be going left and right. On a beam, you're going to be going forward and back. So in this instance, 1D blend spaces are enough. Now, the way that I set these up is that I'm using the actual input of forward for the beams. And if I go take a look at the hanging, for example, take a look at the hang movement, you can see that this one is using the right input and it's just using a -1 and +1 value to be able to select. So just basically your standard input. Now, one thing I do want to point out, because I've been talking about the root motion side of actions and animations, is that I do recommend for all of your AVP stuff, you don't enable root motion, but instead set or force root lock. Now what this is going to do, and especially for like these here. So if I go into and just type in root, you're going to see the force root lock and normalize root motion scale enable root motion. So force root lock being checked keeps the actor right in this middle point, but if I uncheck this, you can see he starts much lower, which can be a bit problematic when we're lining up from a root motion animation. So by checking the force root lock, it means that everything's just going to line up properly. So I do have a blend space set up for hanging, free climb, beam walk, ledge, and wall run we're going to do at a later point, but I did set the animations and put them in here, so we have a horizontal left and right wall run animation set up for later. Now, one thing just really quickly as well is the free climbing is set up with a standard blend space using the right and forward input together. So this way I can look at, going down, left, right, all of these kind of positions here. So with that in mind, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate to my animation blueprint. So whatever animation blueprint you're using, just go ahead and open that up. So I'm going to go to my tutorial assets folder and under animation, open up tutorial AVP. Now you'll see that my graph is pretty simple. I have a velocity, speed, direction, and a simple falling boolean. And if I look at my anim graph, it's just some ground movement and a default slot. So there's really nothing complicated going on here, but let's start adding in some parkour stuff. The first thing we're going to want to do is go into the functions, and we're going to make a new function, and I'm going to call mine set parkour data. Now you can call this whatever you want, but this is going to be where we're going to set all the main data that we want to save from the parkour system to use in our animation blueprint. You should have two things in your animation blueprint. If you do not, I will say you might have a bit of a struggle following, but every single animation blueprint I've ever seen and set up personally always has these two things, which is a character reference, in which case we can see we have the BP third person character. And also if you open up the components, we also have a character movement, a reference here as well. So you're going to want to make sure to have both of these already saved inside of your animation blueprint. And if we look at the event graph here, they're just being saved off of the event initialize animation. So what we're going to do now, though, is we're going to pull off of our character, and we're just going to type in parkour trace system, and you'll see the dynamic parkour trace system here. We're going to get the get node, right click on it, and convert it to a validated get. So this way, it's going to make sure that the system is actually valid before we try to save it. So this way we can right click and promote to a variable. From the variable here, we're going to go ahead and just make a sequence. And then we're going to grab our parkour system reference, and we're just going to start pulling in some values into our animation blueprint here. The first one is going to be the active parkour state, which we can see right here, get active parkour state. And then we're also going to get active parkour sub state as well. So this is going to be the one that indicates if we're hanging or full contact, and this is going to be the one that actually tells us if we're in a beam or a ledge or, whatever type of state we're in. Now, we're going to save this value for wall running, but if we pull off and get wall side, you'll see wall side index. So we want to get this as well, because this is going to indicate which side if we're on a left or right side of wall running. Now, this next part is only going to be needed if you're going to be utilizing the same type of setup I'm using for my blend spaces, where we're going to be using the forward and back input and the right input to control what animation is going to be selected within our blend space. So if you're going to be following this, you're going to want this next step. But if you're using your own direction setup, you don't have to follow this next step. But what we're going to do is just pull off of the parkour trace system here and type in forward. And we're going to get the forward input. And then we're going to pull off again and get the right input. And then now we can just start promoting everything to a variable. So we can right click active parkour state, promote that to a variable, the sub state, promote that to a variable, wall side index, forward input, and right input. Bam. All right, so now we have all of our values being saved in our animation blueprint. Let's start hooking them up in our sequence. So we can see here we have 5 values, so we're going to want to make sure that we have 0 through 4. Because, with indexes, 0 means 1, so we're always going to kind of reduce 1 from the actual count. So we'll go hook these up like so, and then once these are hooked up, we can just highlight them all, and then we'll just move them out to give us some more space. Now, we'll go ahead and compile, save, go back to the event graph, and we're going to make sure that this set parkour data is going to be pushed into where our event update animation is. So you might have yours set up a little bit differently, but you can see from here I'm just using a standard validated get, and then doing that set movement data, which is that function I showed you in the beginning. But this is basically like the tick event for animation. So this way we can make sure that all the data is going to be updated constantly as needed. Now from here, we're going to need to go to our anim graph and start making the actual animation blend. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to right click and type in blend by bool, and we're going to get a blend poses by bool, and we'll hook it up into the slot just like that. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that when you're setting up these animations blends, you always want to make sure your slot is at the end, because if your default slot is, for example, if we put this over here, then whenever we're in the false state, it's not going to allow us to do montages. So we want to make sure the default slot here is towards the end. Now, for true, we're going to just set our standard ground movement, which for me is just this with a nice fall and jump start, same stuff we've, I've been showing you so far. But for the false pose, this is where we're actually going to set our parkour states. But the condition is going to be set. If we grab our active parkour state and just drag it in, we can pull off and do an enum equal and see if it's equal to none. So if it's equal to none, do ground movement. But if it's not, then we're going to right click and do state machine so we can add a new state machine. And we'll just call it parkour states. And then plug it up off of false, just like that. And then we'll double click, open it up, off of the entry, pull off, and we'll add state. Just call it parkour states again. Yeah, you can kind of name it whatever you want. I'm just going to keep it simple for right now. Now, once we're on the interior of our states, what we can do off of the result is we're going to pull off and blend by parkour states, and we're going to push this in. And then for the enum value, we're going to right click, bind, and we're going to active parkour state is going to be set as the binding. Because from here, we can just right click and go ledge climb, point climb, free climb, and balance beam. I guess we can also add wall run there too, why not? Now, we're also going to want to get a blend by substate, and you'll see this one here, blend poses by s_substates. And then we're going to right click on the active enum value and change the binding to the active parkour substate. And then just like we did with the other one, right click and get full contact and hang. Now for me, I like to use the hanging and full contact options for both ledge and beam. So I'm going to grab 2 of these. And then we're going to start pulling in some of our blend spaces. So we got the beam walk, free climb, hang movement, and the ledge movement. Now these are things that you can just easily make with the animations that you're going to be using. Again, these are just 1D blend spaces here, and then the free climb is a 2D. And as I had shown you before, we're just using the inputs with a negative and 1 and positive 1 value. So for this one, we can hook this up into ledge. This one we can hook up into beam. And then this way we can take the beam walk and plug that in off of full contact. And then hang, we'll plug that into hang. But we can take hang, duplicate it, and also plug it in off of our ledge climb as well. And then we'll take our ledge movement and plug this in off of full contact. And then our free climb into free climb. Now for the point, I recommend just using an idle. That's generally what I'll use. But you can use whatever you want. But for me, I'm just going to take this ledge idle, which is this animation right here. And I'm just going to go ahead and throw it into the point climb pose. Now, I do recommend making sure that loop animation is checked in the details panel. Otherwise, it'll just play once and stop. And, well, that's not really going to look very good, is it? But from here, we're just going to go and right-click on the right input, bind it to the right input, and just do this kind of over and over again. So then for the free climb, we'll bind the right input, and then we're also going to bind the forward input here, and then do the same thing for this one. We'll take the forward input and then right input. Perfect. All right, so now we have our binding set up, we have our state set up, so we can go ahead and now compile and save. So now in our anim graph here, we have our ground movement, our parkour states, and a switch if our active parkour states is equal to none. So whenever that changes, it's going to immediately trigger into the parkour states. So what we can do now is just compile, save, minimize, and now if we hit play and go up to our little object here that we set up for climbing, you can see that now we are actually in that idle. And if I move left or right, it does the left or right animations. But there's going to be one thing you're going to notice that's going to go wrong is that when we get to the end, the animation doesn't stop. And we can fix that very easily if we go into the animation blueprint, go back to our set parkour data. And we're going to take the forward input values here that are being set in, we're going to move them back, and we're going to unhook them from their set nodes. Do a right click and select float. Now we're going to grab 2 of these. Now we're going to plug this one into the forward, this one into right, and make sure that the corresponding value is plugged into B. So forward for B and then right into B. Because what we're going to do is we're going to grab our character movement reference in the components tab here. So this is why I said you want to make sure to have both of these. Is if we grab our character movement, pull off, do an enum equal, grab our character movement, pull off, and get movement mode. And then we're going to see if the movement mode is equal to none with a simple enum equal. So if it's equal to none, that's how the character is actually being stopped when they're on the ledge. So when we get up to here, our movement mode is equal to flying right now. But when we get to the edge here, it's going to be equal to none. So we can use that as an identifier for when we want to stop the animation. Because now with that hooked up into the select float, if I go up here and go to the edge, you can see the animation stops the second the character does. It doesn't actually allow me to go anymore, which is a really nice way to be able to just stop those animations from cycling. And now we have a nice listing of parkour states. We have our data being set inside of our parkour elements here. So now from here, we can start setting up some additional pieces that the system can do, such as some active state stuff. So for the active state stuff, we're going to actually add these into the set parkour data here, and we're going to add a new pin on our little sequence, and we're going to pull off and actually get a branch with B and left click, and we'll just kind of hook the pin 5 into the branch. Now what we're going to be checking is we're going to see if our active parkour state enum equal, and then we can see if it's equal to none. All right, so if that's true, what we're going to do is we're going to grab our parkour system, pull off, and we're going to type in beam, and you're going to see an option that says active beam search. Now, if we take this and plug it in, what this is going to do is allow us to be able to walk over areas that we've assigned as beams, and it'll automatically initiate the beam walk. Now, this isn't something you need to have. This is just a nice feature to be able to automatically trigger beams. So if we go over and compile and save with just the function added in, and we'll go ahead and we'll just take this action or this area here, because we've kind of set this up to almost a beam shape, right? So we can take this and we'll push it as sort of the area we can use to get between both of these little points. All right, so if I go ahead and just change this tag, so if I just walk on it right now, just to show you, if I walk on it, you can see nothing's going to happen. It's just kind of like, you know, just a nice little way that for me to get from point A to point B. But if I go into the search here, set tag, and switch this from ledge to beam, but now if I hit play, and I walk over to the actor here, you can see that immediately it triggers beam walk. Now if I go forward, it'll also automatically end, setting me back into my standard movement mode, which I can go back and do the beam walk across again and do the same thing. So you can see that from this, we can actually trigger some really interesting movements, and we'll automatically align the character, move the character, and get everything set up. Now, speaking of ways to align and move the character, outside of being able to just trigger and untrigger beam walks, we can also make it so that way our actor can move around rounded surfaces as well. Now, I'm just going to use ledge climbing for the example on this, but it works for almost any type of climbing except for beams and wall run. So if we go ahead, we're going to get a cylinder, and we're going to add it in, but we're going to go into the transform settings, lock the scale, and I'm going to set it to 10 because I want it to be just really big, nice and wide, something we can really kind of go around and see it sticking with the rotation of the actor. So if we go into our tutorial here, now if the active parkour state is equal to none is false, so in other words, we're in a state of some kind, what we're going to do now is pull off the dynamic parkour trace system reference, and we're just going to type in transform update, and you'll see active climb transform adjustment. When you plug this in, one thing to note is that, remember how we talked about those warp offsets earlier? Inside of the character here, if we open up the parkour system under the overrides, you're going to see here the state warp overrides. Now these are going to be pulled to be able to offset in this function. So it's something very important that you set these up first. However, you can isolate down what is going to be selected inside of the BP third person character. If we have the parkour system selected and we scroll down a little bit, you're going to see parkour state search options, and you see the state transform correction allow listing. Right now it's set to ledge climb full contact, point climb full contact, and balance beam hang. However, if you have not assigned the locations for these yet, you can remove them, and if it's not in this listing, it will not be executed. However, in this instance where we have ledge climb full contact as an option, and we have the transform in our animation blueprint now, we can set the tag here on climb, and then the second one here we'll just set the ledge. And now if I hit play and we go climb up on the area, you can see that the actor is actually rotating along the edge of the surface. Now this also applies to free climbing. It works for hanging as well, but because we don't have anything set up for initializing hang, it's going to be a little difficult to demonstrate that in this video. The next video that we're going to be doing really quickly is going to be covering various ways to set up climb starts utilizing the transition system. And that's going to be where I'm going to showcase some more climb starts and transition start actions. as I only currently have a select number of animations to choose from, so it does make some things a little bit more difficult. But that's why I made certain parts of the system, allowing us to be able to kind of transfer from one montage to another. But we're going to cover that, like I said, in the next video. But as you can see, we are now going around the object just by adding in this transform adjustment. And if I go into the character here, and I just take out ledge climb full contact, and then I hit play and try to do the same thing, you'll notice that he's not going to rotate around it. You can see that he's staying kind of a good distance, but the normal's not really adjusting, the rotation's not really adjusting. Things are just not, doing what you would want them to do. And that's just because of the fact that the rotation and location adjustment is not applied anymore to that type of climb. But with that added back in, we're now good to go, and that's all. That's all we need to do for that. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about in this video really quickly, because it's actually very simple, is how to be able to disengage from climbing. Now, there's two different ways to do it. The first way is without animations, which is what I'm going to be showing you, but we can also use animations inside of the climb transition options. But again, we're going to be covering that in the climb transitions video. For right now, I'm just going to show you how to disengage without using any animation. So if we go into our character, for me, that's third person, blueprints, BP, third person character. And then if we go over to any, spot in our graph that's got some space, I'm going to grab one of these input events, Control D to duplicate it, and I'm going to use the left alt. So just that way I have another key that I can use for this. Now, obviously, how you set up the inputs and bindings is entirely up to you. I'm just setting it separately so that way I can make sure I'm, showcasing things correctly. Now, when we press the left alt, what we're going to do is we're going to see if our active climb. Now, whenever we press the left alt, what we're going to do is see if our parkour state, want to get the active one, right? So we're going to the active parkour state and see if it's enum equal to none. So if it is, then we don't want to really do anything, because if we're not in a state and we're setting this up for dropping off of in a state, then it really doesn't matter. However, if the active parkour state is not equal to none, aka false, we can go ahead and then pull off our parkour system and type in disengage, and you'll see disengage from state. So off of false, we'll plug that in, and then if use animation is true, it's not going to do it by just bringing you off. It's going to look for an animation to do it. So we don't want to have this checked yet. We're going to leave this unchecked for right now. So now if we walk over to this actor here, and I press the spacebar to trigger the actual climbing action, I press Alt, you can see that he does drop off the climb area. So this is making it so that way we're actually dropping off just by pressing the button. No animation is triggering it, but it's still going ahead and dropping off the climb area all the same. Now, as I had said, we can use animations to trigger this as well, but this is just a really easy way to trigger it. Now, one thing to note, though, is that if you try to do this from the beam state, it's going to cause a little bit of a weird issue. So if I press the button, you can see that he tries to get off, but it's not going to work. And the reason being is because of that it's trying to disengage, but when you disengage, you're still standing on the beam, so it's still finding it. So we can actually also do a secondary check to see if our active state is equal to, and our substate is equal to something. So we're going to grab the substate for the active parkour. So we'll get the active parkour substate, and then we'll see if enum equal, and you'd see I duplicated this one here. And then we're just going to grab an and boolean here, just like this. So if our active parkour state is equal to balance beam and our active parkour substate is equal to full contact, our active parkour state is equal to none. Actually, you know what? We'll do an and boolean. And then if that's false, then we'll allow it to go through. So what this will do is make it so that way, whenever we go over this onto the beam here, and we press the Alt key. Oh, maybe it does need to be an or boolean. Maybe I messed that up. Hold on. Let's go ahead and just fix that. We'll place that with an or instead of the and. There we go. Okay, so now we go over to the actor here now and press the Alt key. You can see he doesn't actually do the release. We actually have to walk off the beam, but if I go over to the ledge actor here, press Alt, it will drop off just like normal. Now, as I had said before, we can use the animation. We can do a lot of different things from the climbing and disengaging. So we're going to be doing a lot more videos about things as we go on. But this is kind of like the initial setup, understanding how the tags work, how the states work, how the animation blueprint side of things work, how to be able to call certain things. So this is kind of like the overall gist of how to get the system running. But obviously with a more in-depth fashion. So in the next one, like I said, we're going to be looking at setting up additional climb starts using the transition system, which is actually pretty cool. So I am super excited about that. I hope you guys are. But that's really going to close it out for this video. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope to see you in the next one. If you have any problems, issues, concerns, comments, whatever, please feel free to reach out to me in the Discord or in the comments section. I try to respond within a reasonable time frame. But I will say Discord's always going to be the best option. But I hope to see you guys in the next one. But that's going to close it out for now. Stay tuned, and as always, stay animated.